Hello everyone and welcome. Yes, my name is Arafat and welcome back to another episode of All Talk, No Shock. So today I want to talk to you about something that has been doing the rounds in the news recently with some recent releases, but it's an argument as old as time itself. So predominantly in the Masterpiece collection, but not exclusively, as to whether there is such a thing as being too Toon or such a thing as being overly stylized. So let me explain.
All talk, no shock.
So depending which company you collect from and which style you like to follow, there's a huge drive out with most Masterpiece collecting fans to have a G1 accurate collection of all of the characters basically mimicking their cartoon on-screen appearances. Now, the companies that are very good or even guilty of doing this really are the likes of Takara in the Masterpiece range and Fans Toys as well, with also the likes of X-Transbots also dabbling into it. But then there's the other side of the spectrum and some companies who don't go in for that style whatsoever. They have their own style on that. And recently, and what has spurred a big talking point, is Kang Toys, or CHUG Toys, depending how you want to pronounce it, and their Predacons. Now, these are incredibly stylized. They almost bear no resemblance to the Generation 1 toys or cartoon inspirations of them. So, with this, the argument is, do you want to have something that is very Toon accurate, hyper Toon accurate to such a point, or do you want to have something that has a degree of stylization to give it a bit of separation? At least then you feel like you have a sculpted robotic figure, or do you want something ripped out of a 1980s cartoon? Now normally this comes down to personal preference and really shouldn't matter, but when it comes to a very interesting point is when people choose avidly not to buy something because they say it's too Toon accurate or too stylized. So let's just have a look at that. What is too Toon accurate? How can that be such a problem? I've encountered that a little bit myself. One thing that I particularly do like is when you look at the MP36, the Masterpiece Megatron. In my opinion, it is the best Masterpiece Megatron on the market through all of the other companies that have tried it. This is the standard bearer. This is Takara. They've outdone themselves with this mould and it stood the test of time. This also does start their journey of going down a very G1 cartoon aesthetic in their Masterpiece range. But it's not just a Toon aesthetic. There is a bit of stylization, particularly when you look at the legs and the hips, and there is a degree of roboticness to it. It's not just clear cut from the cartoon. Now recently, if you look at Fans Toys with their Cup, or Coot as they've recently released, this is again very stylized, very smooth, but I would almost say too much to a point. Particularly when you look at the chest and you look at the arms, there's such smoothness going on here, you don't really feel like you're handling a robot at all. It almost doesn't look like it's bending. It's too clean and pristine and you don't feel like you've got a robotic figure at all. Now also with Fans Toys and the upcoming Robot Paradise, to give them their name, is their Soundwave and the cassettes. And particularly when you look at Soundwave, this is again so clean. There's nothing wrong with being particularly clean, but when it's such to a point that you almost don't feel like it can transform, you're getting into Action Master territory, where it feels like it is a standalone statue. And whilst there is very clever engineering to it, it loses something of an aesthetic of a bitty and gritty robot with bits hanging off it here and there. You don't want to have too much kibble, but you want to have some definition of a character. But then finding other companies who keep away from that a little bit, and one company that comes to mind is Make Toys. Now if you look at their Cupola, there's no question that this is Chrome Dome, but it certainly doesn't scream of the Generation 1 cartoon. It's very similar in its likeness, but again there's very much a robotic element. The arms are much stockier, even the chest is much broader than the cartoon. And there is again elements of saying yes, this is a Transformer, but you can definitely tell that this is a Chrome Dome character. Again, the same could be said with their Seeker molds, but only just. Now, Make Toys Howling Meteor, their Starscream, and what would ultimately be their Seeker mold for all of the jets, they were very, very clean and quite revolutionary for its time when it came out. Nothing really came across as that pristine and clean. And with the gold cockpit on the chest, this again did scream a Generation 1 cartoon. But again, when you compare this to the recent offering, the MP52, the new Starscream, that's clearly trying to be straight out of the cartoon. Where the Make Toys one, I would at least like to have to look at it and say that that is trying to be a little bit different. But it was very clean. I can see how that does go for a Toon aesthetic, but generally Make Toys as a company do keep away and go their own way with things. But of course this video isn't to tell you about which company you should go for. This is to give you a course of styles and extremes, and when you get to this recent offering of Kang Toys or CHUG Toys of the Predacons, this is a very stylized design. Now that's not to say it's bad, but I do understand people saying it's not going to fit in with their collection, but it depends how you want your collection to look, and it depends if you want that uniformity throughout. So the Predacons that have been released, and now we have got our first glimpse of what Predaking is going to start to look like. We can see how this very stylized combiner is going to look like. But again, you can tell it's Predaking. It's not a million miles away. The individual components and limbs do look different to the Generation 1, but they don't necessarily mean that they're bad. But when it gets to the point that it hurts the design of the figure and ultimately the sale value, then, well, that's a failing on the company's part. When people say they're too Toon and they're too stylized, they've gone too far from centre, then personal preference goes out the window and you have to start making some choices. So when you look at Kang Toys, yes, particularly when you look at, say, their dive bomb in beast mode, in bird mode, it doesn't exactly scream Generation 1, and it will be enough to turn people off and turn people away. Again, with their upcoming Razor Claw, in the beast mode, everyone has said it's looked like a Zoid, more so than the Lion of the Generation 1 cartoon. It certainly doesn't scream Generation 1 cartoon, but it is quite far from centre. Trouble is, the proof is in the pudding, and you won't know till you get it in your hand. But a company that seems to have got a balance quite right is this recent spate of release from X-Transbots, and in particular when you look at their Grapple, Inferno, Artfire and Hauler, these 4 truck shapes that have got a good deal of G1 homage to them, but they also have a lot of detailing going on, particularly in vehicle mode. There's a lot of detailing to make them look like actual vehicles. This is a very good balance between stylization and homage to the original Generation 1 cartoon. But then again, it does go the other way as well, and it's not to say it's too Toon to a fault, but if you look at some of the Studio Series 86 in the CHUG line, with recent offerings such as Wreck-Gar, this is the best looking Wreck-Gar that we have seen, and probably the closest we have got from straight out of the TV. It's sold very well as a figure, it's been very much acclaimed as a very good figure. I've got a copy myself, I really do like it. But again, it's saying that it is trying to be straight from the 1986 movie. That is very much its purpose, very much that range's purpose. It's not to say it's bad. So how is that any different to being too Toon in the Masterpiece world? It shows you, doesn't it, that the attention to detail on each figure and each story and approach that a design is trying to tell really will differ from figure to figure, from line to line. So when you look at, say, MP52 and people say that's too Toon, the proportions are all wrong, it looks like it's trying to be out of the cartoon, but then we praise the Studio Series 86 Wreck-Gar for looking just like he is in the 1986 movie, well, you can't win them all, can you? But ultimately, there is no point. There is no right or wrong answer. But when you hear the lines of being too Toon, too stylized, yes, there is a point. But if it turns people away, if it says, I won't even look at it, I won't even entertain it in my collection, then maybe that does go a bit too far from centre. Maybe you've got to be other likes of an MMC or an X-Transbot who keep close enough so they can be recognisable and they can fit in with the majority of people's collections, but stylised enough to say, I don't find this painful to look at and I want it in my collection because I like the detailing that each individual company adds to their figure. But what do you guys think? Do you think that there is such a thing as too Toon and too stylized? Is it just down to personal preference, or is it something that we're only going to see a lot more of going forward, given the diversity in the Masterpiece market, especially with third party? But that's all for today. Thanks for watching, and as always, I will see you on the next one.